So I touched on this in another video, but I feel like it warrants its own video, and this one might get me a lot of attention in a way that is not my favorite, but that's okay. I'll have those conversations because I'm telling you the truth. So if it's so bad for us, how can they sell it to us? So we're talking about processed foods, chemicals in your foods, that sort of thing. I've been talking a lot this month about eating real foods. We've been going on with a Eat the Rainbow challenge, or a 30-a-week challenge, just trying to get more fruits and vegetables and plant foods into our life. And I've been talking a lot about processed foods and why I think they're bad. So if they're so bad, how can they sell them to us? Not even just sell them to us, but the government actively recommends we eat them a lot of times. And that doesn't sit well with what I'm saying for a lot of people. A lot of people believe that if the government is, pushing it on us, it must be healthy for us or good for us, or at least not bad for us. And I just wanted to talk about a few of the reasons why that might not be the case. So first, I touched on these in another video. I'm gonna try to elaborate a little bit more here. We can have the conversation if anybody would like to comment below, bring up other points or whatever, but just going from what I've learned in school and through my research, one reason why it might not be the case is that policies have to take into account a lot of different things. So a lot of people think that a policy should just be based on what's best for that situation. So food policy should be based on what's healthy for us. That is absolutely not what food policy is based on. In fact, it's not even probably the major point food policy is based on. And if you go back in the history of food policies, of the USDA, of the FDA, if you go back and look at the history of some of these organizations and policies, you'll see it had more to do with economics and less to do with what's healthy for us. Because when you're a policymaker working for the entire country, you have to consider a lot of things, and the science of health or whatever is not, one, you're not an expert in it. Nobody that's making policy is an expert in what's healthy for us, really. There are a few doctors up in there, but it doesn't mean they know what a healthy diet is. So they do ideally get recommendations from people who allegedly know what a healthy diet is, and we'll get to that in point 3, but they also have a lot of recommendations from other people. And they have to consider economy, what their policies are going to do to businesses and to the food industry, farms and food production companies. And as you guys probably know, a lot of our food production is actually just coming from a few major mega companies, mega farm agricultural companies, big ag, if you see that anywhere. And those people have a lot of money to make sure that their interests are heard more than anybody else's. So policymakers have to take into consideration what they say, what's good for farmers, what's good for the economy, what's good for the companies that are selling foods, and kind of what's good for us. But there's a lot of other things they have to consider. And because of that, they can have conflicts of interest. A lot of these policymakers have relationships with those companies, and those companies are not there for your best interest. They're there for their stockholders' best interest. I don't want to be cynical about that, but that's just business. That's the way it works. And a lot of these policymakers have relationships with those companies. They served on their boards, or they own stock in them, or it's their neighbor, or whatever. So they have conflicts of interest. It's not just your health that they have to consider. And that's being nice about it, but I like to be full of grace for people. It makes me happier. So being nice about it, they have a lot of things to consider, not just what's best for your health. And on top of that, these government bodies, these organizations like the FDA, they have tricky language and loopholes that they use so that when they give a report to the policymaker, it's easy to get things through that maybe could be looked at a little bit more. For instance, there's a ruling on the FDA that is, it's called GRAS, and it stands for Generally Recognized as Safe. I don't know about you, but that in itself is a little too vague for me to want to put it in my body. But a lot of products and foods that we put in and on our bodies have ingredients that have that GRAS designation, and we don't know that unless we go look it up. And that is like, just means that they're lacking strong evidence that it's extremely and immediately dangerous for you. It doesn't mean that it's safe in the doses that we're consuming it over our lifetime of consuming it. It just means that the company that made it gave them some data that they produced that showed that they didn't have any clear, obvious, immediate danger. That's kind of what it means. So yeah, you have a lot of stuff that you're eating and putting on and in your body that is GRAS, generally recognized as safe. That's not good enough for me. So there's a lot of tricky language, and there's a lot of loopholes, and there's a lot of conflicting interests that go into making policies. So that's why you can't just trust that because the government says it or allows it, it's necessarily good for you. You have to kind of make your own determination what's good for you. The United States has more of a different approach to things than some of these other countries I've mentioned, where a lot of these food additives are banned because of the science showing that they're harmful or potentially harmful to humans. Those countries have more of a better safe than sorry approach to their health. I adopt that approach as well. I prefer to avoid it if I'm not pretty sure about it. But the United States is more of like it's just more industry friendly. So the responsibility to prove that it's harmful is on the consumer, rather than the responsibility to prove that it's safe being on the corporation. So a lot of things get through that way because we do not have the resources that they do. And therefore a lot of things don't get like proven to be unsafe to them, and they're allowed to just keep using them. So that's a big reason why I would say I wouldn't just trust that just because the government says that means it's safe. Now, kind of connected to that and those relationships that some of these policymakers have with industries is lobbying. Most of you probably know what lobbying is, but these corporations and big agricultural companies have a lot of resources. I would say the majority of their annual spending goes into lobbying and marketing because they want to make sure they're allowed and they want to sell to you. And they spend billions of dollars doing that. They will spend so much money making sure that their interests are heard and catered to by policymakers. There's no way we can compete. So even if money were off the table, they have someone following policymakers around talking in their ear. You don't. I don't. Maybe I should hire another VA to go up there and do that, but then you'd need one for like each policymaker, and then you have to take them to lunch, and then you have to give them like basketball tickets, and it gets pretty expensive. So we can't compete with that. So that's another like conflict of interest that you have going on there. And then another reason why is because science in this, particularly in this field, in the field of nutrition and what's healthy to eat, is very difficult to administer, and it's very inconsistent in its results. And there are a lot of reasons for that, like a lot of reasons for that. But to do a really solid, like randomized controlled trial is very expensive when it comes to food, because you can't control everything in the human body. So to do a really, really, really like spot on, real, true study, you would need to like get people with like similar genetic composition and similar microbiome and put them in a residential facility where you can control everything about their environment and their habit and their schedule and how much they're eating and when and what, and measure everything about it. And then you would have to do that over their entire life to really see, because sometimes there's a cumulative effect that doesn't show up just when you do a one-off trial. So that's not really possible for almost anybody to do. So we do the best that we can, but a lot of nutrition science is based on epidemiological data, which means that it just looks at large numbers of the population and it tries to collect a lot of different information based on surveys which are not always super accurate because people aren't always great at remembering what they eat or how they felt, especially if you're talking about like after the fact. So you're asking lots and lots of people to just self-report information that they probably don't remember very well and sometimes don't want to admit, and then you're running it through a computer program to try to see where there's connections. So it may be that people that eat a lot of this often feel like this, but it may be that people that feel like this want to eat a lot of this. So we really don't know. We just can see connections, and then like the media takes it and tries to translate it for you and runs with it, and it just becomes a whole other thing. So epidemiological data, it has its uses, but it's not perfect. And then when you try to run trials, of course, there's all those variables I mentioned before that you can't really control for. So you can ask a few hundred people to eat a certain way and to record how they feel, but they're not going to do it perfectly. They're not probably going to want to admit to you if they mess up. They might not remember how they feel. And frankly, our bodies are all very different. So it might feel good to this person and bad to this person, but that doesn't mean it's bad or it's good. It just means it's bad for this person and good for this person, or whatever the case may be. So that's another reason why science can be really difficult when it comes to like food science, nutrition science. It's hard. It's hard to do accurately. It's inconsistent. That's why everybody can prove that the other guy's wrong, because there's studies to show all of the things are real and true. So you get policymakers that get one of those studies and not any of the conflicting studies, and that's what they're basing things on. So some of our like foundational recommended nutrition facts in this country are based on just one or two studies that were done a long time ago, and there are a lot of people that have questions whether they were actually very like scientifically sound studies, whether the data was maybe manipulated or cherry picked, whether the studies were done in a way that meant that they were actually like really accurate. And even if it gets like completely debunked, all of those decades of policy aren't going to just go away, because that's now the way that we do things, and nobody really looks back at like why we do things that way to see if it still holds true. They just keep going. So there's a lot of weakness in nutrition science. So trying to make policies for the entire country based on that kind of science in an area that is so unique to the individual is just kind of a lost cause. So they try, and I know some of the doctors that work on some of these task forces, and I know that they are smart people and educated, and I know that they have hearts that want to provide good recommendations for people, but you just can't provide sweeping generalized recommendations that are really going to be that accurate for people, because we're all so different and there's so many factors involved, and the science is just so imperfect. So let me know what you think. Do you think I'm full of it? Or did I bring up some good points, make you think about a few things? If you want to be part of the conversation, let me know. You can click the link in my bio to schedule a strategy session with me. You can tell me how full of, no, you just don't use that link to tell me how full of it I am. You can make a comment below if you really need to. But if you want to talk more about where to go from here and how to figure out what you need to eat or make the changes in your life, we can do a strategy session for free. I'll give you a free call. Click the link in my bio, schedule some time. We'll talk all about you, and I won't charge you a dime. Okay? All right, I'll talk to you soon.